Well, if it's not the season for weeping and gnashing of teeth, predictions about the end of the world, and metaphors about the genuses of ovies and bovies. That's sheep and goats, by the way. Yeah, okay. This can only mean one thing, my friends, that Advent is nigh upon us. Nevertheless, today is Christ the King Sunday, a special day for us as members of St. Luke's, as members of Luke's Place, as Christ the King is set before us each and every time that we enter this place. You'll notice that Christ is adorned as a king, and in his left hand is the orb that signifies his power to reign. You also that an orb is back in the corner in the little stained glass windows back there, and an orb also is held by Mary as Jesus, the baby king, is sort of pondering that on the front cover, right? It's set before us each and every time that we enter this place. I think, I hope, I trust by the folks that put it there to remind us of Christ's kingship, of his reign, but I also think it's put there to remind us of what is expected of us as his subjects. As that is the case, today marks more than just a singular day in the temporal cycle of the church year. It actually acts as kind of a fulcrum in which we are beginning to turn back towards the center. We're turning back towards the heart of the incarnation, right? Yes, Advent is next week. We're turning back towards the cycle of incarnation, which leads to the cycle of resurrection, and round we go, right? So it acts as kind of like a fulcrum in which we are turning, and as we do, we set aside this day to sort of, forgive the metaphor, crown the year that is past, but also to look forward in hope to the year that is before us, the year that will be. And we'll be reading from the Gospel of Mark this year on Sundays with a good bit from the Gospel of John, as Mark is shorter than Matthew and Luke. Mark gives us one of the most human depictions of Jesus, and as such is a favorite of many. But perhaps what is most telling is that both Matthew and Luke use Mark quite a bit in shaping their own narratives of Christ's life. Therefore, on any given Sunday, some stories sound quite familiar to ones that we have already heard, save for a few instances when we hear things that are particular to one gospel over the other. And today is one of those days. Matthew speaks more about outer darkness and eternal punishment than any of the other gospel writers. And as tempting as it would be for me to offer a number of quotes from the hallowed sermon, "Sinners in the Hand of an Angry God," I have to do that with the soundtrack of Hamilton in my head, King George, right? I'm not going to. Tempting as it would be to offer parallels to what one might expect if they end up a goat, I'm going to stick to talking about sheep. I'm going to do that given the fact that our King is the shepherd of our souls. Almost every time this passage comes around for preachers to think about preaching upon, so does the meme of this shepherd trying to pull this sheep out of a ditch, right? And he's trying as hard as he can, just with all of his strength, trying to pull this sheep out of this, they're stuck in this ditch. And when he finally gets the sheep out, the sheep bounds away and jumps in another ditch, to the consternation of the shepherd. This, of course, gives some credence to the fact that sheep are not generally known for their intelligence. Nevertheless, That does not mean that they are without virtue or that they are irredeemable. Despite the fact that sheep are often considered dumb, they have some pretty impressive cognitive functions. My favorite being that once bonded to a shepherd's voice, the sheep most likely will only ever listen to that voice from then on. Some might consider that devotion or even loyalty, depending on how much freedom you are willing to give that metaphor. And to the extent that you can do that, perhaps you might consider this, that along with that, it has been observed by shepherds that members of the flock sometimes develop deep and abiding bonds with other members of the flock. And according to some shepherds, some sheep will stick up for other members of the flock if it comes to a territorial dispute, and that they even grieve losses within their own flock. Does that sound familiar? On the other hand, sheep have a tendency to follow closely the movements of other sheep, particularly the sheep that are right in front of them. Which brings me back to the prominence of the shepherd. And perhaps one of the most profound things about our shepherd, that he is the good shepherd. And that if there is any darkness in this world, it is the forces that array themselves against that goodness. Forces that make it their mission to lead sheep astray in any way that they can. And if that doesn't work, then the shepherd himself becomes vulnerable. Hence the tactic of striking down the shepherd. However, our shepherd was not struck down. It says in the scriptures that the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And that just as the Father has given the Son power to lay down his life, so has he given him power to take it up again. And so who says you can't have Advent, Christmas, Good Friday, and Easter all in one sermon? The point is that same shepherd is also our King. And we offer our fealty to him. And as lieges of his kingdom, we have all taken oaths, and most recently renewed those oaths on All Saints. Our credo is what unites us. It unites all churches, my friends. And our pledge is to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, and our neighbors as ourselves. And I guess if anyone needs a description on how to love someone as themselves, and how to love their neighbor, Matthew 25 seems as good a place as any to encounter some of the most basic criteria. So let's not complicate things. Feeding the hungry, quenching the thirst of those in need, welcoming the stranger, clothing the naked, tending to the sick, visiting those in prison, whether those made by human hands or by the wiles of their own hearts. As subjects, one might consider that the bar upon which all things are measured. Two things remain for us to consider: forgiveness and grace. It just may be that the test of our faith is not only if you can do these things for people within your circle, but that we can do these things for people outside our circle as well, especially if we are estranged from them. Can you do these things for your enemy? For what good is it to love only those who love you? Even sinners do the same. Thus, in God's kingdom, when we face judgment, perhaps only one question will be asked of us. How well did you love?